Today's date is January 27th, 2025, and the time is 5 p.m. Tonight's meeting will be audio taped and minutes will be prepared. In respect to all parties, we ask those present turn off cell phones or set to vibrate. Those in attendance are asked to legibly complete the attendance sheet upon the front table. I'd like to take a moment to review the procedures the commission will follow tonight. First, the commission will handle the normal housekeeping agenda items. Then for each application on the agenda, I will open the public hearing on the item. The planning and zoning staff will then present the staff report, including the staff recommendation. Any letters or other communication received from the public prior to the hearing will be entered into the record. The applicant will then have the opportunity to present his or her case and respond to staff report. Next, we will hear comments from the public. If you would like to speak either in support of or against the application, you must come to the microphone. Please first state your name and address for the record. All interested parties shall be heard, but repetitious comments should be avoided. Repetitious or irrelevant comments may be ruled out of order by the chair. I ask that you remain respectful and courteous with your comments at all times. There will be a limit of 3 minutes for each comment. After all public comments have been heard, the staff and applicant may make a closing statement. The hearing shall then be closed by motion and vote. Thereafter, no further comments from the staff, public, or applicant may be heard unless asked for by the commission. The commission shall then deliberate the case and may ask questions of the applicant, the staff, or any party offering testimony. However, such questions do not reopen the hearing for additional comments from the public unless so requested or approved by the commission. The commission will then formulate and vote on a motion. The motion will typically either grant or deny the requested application. Any commission member who has an ex parte communication to place in the record of this meeting should do so prior to the beginning of the deliberation of the respective agenda item. That being said, the next item on the agenda is roll call. Let the record reflect that we have all of our commissioners here tonight, even the newbie. Mr. Corey, do we need to make any special announcements or anything?
Yeah,
Roll
just
call.
as far as any special announcements, I think you covered that we have the 5 members here, but I would like to make a reference that Mr. Steve Corey is our newest member. He's appointed by the Board of Supervisors for the new 5-year term beginning in 2025. And so welcome.
Okay, ready for the next item on the agenda is the election of the chair for the zoning commission for 2025. This is an action item. By doing that, we need to have our nominations. Do we have anybody that wants to nominate?
Since she's done so well, I'd make a motion to nominate Chris again.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Do we have any other nominations? Corey, you want to be chair for a while? Okay. All right, well, we'll close the nominations if there are no other nominations. And then how do you want us to vote? Just vote by roll call?
Yeah, and so you would open it up for a roll call vote.
Okay, read them off. We're gonna do a roll call vote.
Okay, Steve Corey.
I vote yes.
Okay, Corey Meister.
Aye.
Jeff Hansen.
Aye.
Tom Bryan.
Aye.
Chris Elmerzant.
I abstain. Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Okay,
that item is done.
approved, and Chris is chair.
I am chair again, so I will continue on to item number 4, which is the election of the vice chair of the zoning commission for 2025, which is an action item. I will open up the nominations for vice chair.
Nominate Tom Bryan.
Second.
We have a nomination and a second. Do we have any other nominations? Okay, we're closing the nominations. Now we need a roll call vote again.
Okay, Steve Corey.
Aye.
Corey Meister. Jeff Hansen.
Aye.
Tom Bryan.
I'll abstain.
Oh, come on. Jump on board here. Yes.
Chris Elmerzant. Okay, it looks like Tom, you are now chair. Vice chair, excuse me.
Congratulations. We'll give you a moment to accept your election results here and address the public with a speech. No pressure. I'm just kidding. Let's move on. Okay, number 5, public comment on matters not on the agenda. Nobody on the phone?
Nobody on the phone.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. Approval of the minutes from the previous meetings, 6/26 of 24 and 11/25 of 24. And you want to do those independently, correct?
Yeah, I think it would be good to do this separately. I would like to make a comment. I think it's been a good practice to vote as far as attendance at the previous meetings. It kind of sets a good precedent. We do still have this one sitting out there as far as the makeup of that August meeting when we had the quorum of 3 at that time that included Barb Parker. And kind of going back and reviewing Robert Rules of Order in particular, Robert Rules of Order doesn't really put a major stipulation on it as far as being present at the meeting. Rather, it's an acknowledgement that the minutes, in a sense, would represent or reflect the respective meetings. And the reason I bring that up is we do have that kind of, just still sitting out there, and it doesn't give me heartburn that it sits out there because it didn't have an action item where you made a recommendation or a direction either to the Board of Adjustment or to the Board of Supervisors, but we basically did information that night. And I think that had a lot to do with the level of the quorum too, where, we didn't need everybody there desperately at that point in time. So, I would leave it to the commission to consider if you want to leave those out there and we put a note on them that they kind of were not passed, but that's probably not a good practice to do. And I think that under looking at your rules of order and bylaws, I think that it is possible, depending on how the commission feels about the content of that August meeting, which has been available via audio and of course the minutes themselves, that there would be justification to acknowledge that that was an official meeting through the approval of the minutes.
So we're talking about August 26, 24, right?
Specifically to August. That's the
Okay.
one that hung over. Then the last time that you officially met as a commission was November of
Mhm.
last year, as there was not a December meeting. So
Okay.
I would probably suggest the board consider breaking those up into separate votes.
Okay.
I guess to Dan's comments too, I had a little concern because Jeff and myself were not at that meeting, and with Barb not being here, our normal practice was a quorum to
Mm.
pass that. And I'm like, well, we can't. But then when I looked into the Robert's Rules of Orders, it said just by unanimous consent, even if you weren't at the meeting, that can be voted on. So I'd feel comfortable to do it that way to get those out of the way and off
Okay.
your mind, Dan.
Anybody else
So-
have comments on procedure on this one?
I would agree.
Okay. Okay, so is that a motion to approve the August minutes?
I would make a motion to approve the August minutes.
Okay, we have a motion.
A second.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay,
5-0.
unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay, now we need to approve the November 25th to 24 minutes.
I'd make a motion to approve the November 25th, 24 minutes.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Okay,
Thank you.
both of them have been approved. Okay, so number 7, items of business, public hearing action item for the consideration of nuclear energy facilities to be included as part of the Woodbury County zoning ordinance summary. Dan, do you want to do your thing and read into the record?
Yes, absolutely. The commission is holding this public hearing again, extended over from last year, to discuss again the potential inclusion of nuclear energy facilities as a land use option in the Woodbury County zoning ordinance. This hearing will look at various aspects of permitting nuclear energy facilities, including but not limited to nuclear energy generation, modular nuclear energy systems, and other nuclear technologies. Kind of the role of these public hearings is to engage the level of public input as far as how we feel. And this is another one of those items that we noticed out to all the papers, such as your Sergeant Bluff, Moville, Danbury, as well as the Sioux City Journal within the legals. And of course, we had online publications as far as tonight's meeting via our Facebook page. And yes, we do have a Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter account as well, that posts that out there. The commission is set to look at options such as amending the land use summary table of allowed uses to designate nuclear energy facilities as either an allowed or a conditional use in all or specific zoning districts. That's part of kind of asking the public in the sense of what the expectations would be for respective land use. And we all know how consequential the other forms of energy have been over the last couple years, whether it has been the commercial wind as well as the solar-based issues. Additionally, discussions could involve amendments to add new sections related to nuclear energy facilities, update definitions, and renumber and or reorganize the content of the zoning ordinance as necessary. That line is just put in there for the normal housekeeping. Anytime you look at amending an ordinance, it technically has effect on other areas of the ordinance as far as renumbering this. And I think that just a few comments before we get into the big part of the public hearing. Just kind of want to mention that we've learned a lot, I think, over the last few years as far as process and taking up some of these energy based issues across the board. Our county is very active and very bright as far as how they see land use. And a lot of times I think back to, I don't want the teacher to come out in me, but I oftentimes think of the local government or the county being the government closest to the people, especially the commission being appointed by the Board of Supervisors to engage the public and try to understand if there's a level of demand out there on the issue. And we look at this issue as being a directive to us from the Board of Supervisors. And I look at historically some of the philosophers like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, who talk about the whole state of nature, how we govern ourselves. Hobbes was very distrustful of the state of nature, and you see his argument on the role of government having some level of options in there. While Locke talks about property owner rights and your labors being your freedoms as far as what you acquire based on life, liberty, and property, where that usually came from. So throughout our public policy, we a lot of times have a tug of war based on those interests, landowner rights, and what is the neighbor doing. And in the sense we have a government to be a balance or a referee as far as looking at balancing the level of honesty and integrity that sometimes happens if we had a free level. If we did everything John Locke's way versus Hobbes' way, it's that pendulum on how we govern ourselves. So as far as saying that, in public policy, we look at the whole pendulum of issue identification. Issue identification meaning, is there a demand? Is there a problem there that exists that we likely need to address? Regardless on, this could apply to this public hearing as well as the next one. But with that said, with the energy situation in our country, we have seen a significant impact as far as there's higher levels of power and energy being used. Energy is the soul of an economy as far as fueling the economy to look at possibly new industries and economic development and items such as that. And I do want to state publicly that this agenda item is to look at how Woodbury County as a people can make a determination on our energy needs here locally. A lot of times we hear nuclear being a big national standard or a national discussion or even a state level discussion. We certainly know it is through the level of regulation that is out there, obviously, on how they've asserted themselves. But I need to make it very clear that we are not pursuing this policy or receive this directive. I have not had anybody come to me from a company to say, hey, look at nuclear. We are bringing this up as far as looking at just generally what's been going on in the world and those type of things. And it was brought to us, really presented to us by the Board of Supervisors directly to look at it and just seeing how we as a local community closer to the people, what can we do as far as these energy type of solutions? I will state, and I've said this in past public hearings, we are already through the conditional use permit process in a situation where we could permit or have a conditional use procedure for permitting nuclear in the general industrial zoning district. If we looked at the 3.03.3 interpretation as well as the likewise uses. So we do have a bit of structure as far as it coming to the zoning commission and the Board of Adjustment. And I do think, and I see Mr. Montino here tonight, who has a good vast knowledge of nuclear, and I definitely encourage hearing a little bit more from him as far as the different levels of government type of relationship. But I do know that a lot of times when you have so much top-down federal involvement and federal relationship, sometimes the more streamlined at the local level, we make it and tailor it to try to fit the wider approach. And what I mean by that is, of course, you got to have some process at the local level that notifies neighbors, creates it as a community involved effort through the conditional use. And that's how our conditional use is technically designed. But we know very well from the telecommunication towers what happens when the feds assert themselves quite a bit through the point that we're looking at setbacks and some of the very basics. Iowa Code 8C kind of regulates our level of what we can do, but it appears that we can legitimately have a process down at the local level that would give the county a voice in that. But looking through all the different levels of what a nuclear company, goes through, they have to go through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They have to go through the state in a lot of respects with the Utilities Board. And then there's all the different safety ramifications, et cetera. So the question is, do we get to a point where we get really used to what those federal regulations are so that we can have a conditional use permit process that might be very complementary to that, as far as that we're staying in line with the different regulations. But I would have to say that I don't have a lot of heartburn as far as if somebody were to approach us, in a few months or something, or 2 years, that we do have some type of process. But the question is, we should have based on what the supervisors sent us, a conversation with our public beforehand, before any of these type of projects might happen in the future, so that there's a heightened level of awareness. I will say tonight, I can't comment on very cleanly as far as our crowd size, but we certainly don't have a solar energy style crowd size tonight or a wind turbine. I think that's quite obvious. So I think we've got to be kind of careful as far as what we look at, as far as these meetings, and maybe an approach that we want to go. If we're looking at that information that I put in the packet for background information, again, that's nothing set in stone. That's the couple options that show you. Option 1, we pretty much have a process in there by way of the conditional use permit. Option 2 adds a little bit more complementary information. But under our normal practice, if we're interested in pursuing something, then we would go further on getting further input and running it through the county attorney's office and things like that before we can perfect something to where we're comfortable enough to send it up to the Board of Supervisors. So that's my comments for now, and I would encourage public input.
Do we need to recognize this letter that
Yes,
we got from
yes.
Sioux City?
Yes, I would ask that the zoning commission receive into the record this statement from Christopher Matson, who is in the planning and zoning department with the city of Sioux City. And for the public's benefit, I'd like to read it off. It says, of Christopher Matson, sent it on Wednesday, January 22nd. Good morning, Dan. City zoning would support a county zoning ordinance amendment to clarify that nuclear energy facilities are allowed in the general industrial zoning district. We would like to see the following, as the general industrial zone is predominantly in close proximity to Sioux City. A conditional use permit or similar process that would require a public hearing and review of the proposed location. As noted in your background documents, submittal of a site plan, safety evaluation, and environmental impact statement. Due to the location, FAA review of the proposal if the site is within the airport zone. Thank you, Chris Mattson. I would like to comment that that's a very reasonable request there that kind of reflects a very similar process on much of our conditional uses. Those are things that we definitely do check into. So I would ask that this be included in our record.
Need a motion to accept? Whoops, sorry. Need a motion to accept?
I'd make a motion to accept the letter from Chris Mattson into the record.
Okay, we have a motion. Could I get a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, and all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. May I ask, it was Jeff motion and second? Okay, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this time, you want us to open the public hearing?
Yeah, it would be open, yeah.
Okay, do we have anybody that wants to speak to the nuclear zoning ordinance information that we have here? And no one on the phone?
Nobody on the phone?
No one on the phone. We have,
Questions.
okay, but we've already mentioned that you're here and you're available for questions,
Yes.
so that's public information now. Okay. But we have no public here that has questions.
No questions, and that's what we're looking for.
That's right. Yes. Very, very little.
And I will, if I may comment for the record, I've contacted other jurisdictions. I've sent out kind of a letter with general questions, kind of asking for their perspectives. You would see in the background material, for example, Mayor Bob Scott has been generally supportive. And so everybody that was in the packet that made those comments, that's pretty much the level of input there too. And I'm very surprised generally after the other forms of energy that we have been through, that this one seems to be the least at this time as far as input. And so again, I think I would probably suggest that we continue with having the opportunity for these meetings for a bit. I have it again next month and collect information before we ultimately kind of come up with something. And I think that I would ask the board generally, or the commission generally, what your thoughts are as far as a potential framework through the county attorney's office. But with that said, I think that a very consequential component of any debate and discussion is the level of public. So that's what we're definitely interested in.
Dan, I have a question,
Yes.
if that's okay. Do we know when the last nuclear facility was built and where in the US? When was the last time we've had a new plant actually constructed and where?
That's a tough question as far as the different types, for sure. We're dealing with the older scale nuclear. I've seen numbers that have been maybe 80s or before that. There's been these other efforts across the country on this modular information. And I keep hearing about and reading through the literature different forms on spent materials and in other perspectives. So I think that's kind of a tough one, but I will say that linking back to where federal policy has been, the Biden administration last year around May or June put out in a memo. Of course, they've been pursuing that green policy and everything, and they had the nuclear. It wasn't as mentioned as much as the other forms, but it did have nuclear in there as a form of energy as far as the carbon neutral type of energy, but I don't have a perfect date for you on that.
No, I'm just, that's fine. I'm just because it's certainly what I've been digging into on it. The technology certainly changed. And to your point, the size and the scale has been drastically reduced. You don't have to build them with the giant cooling towers anymore. They've even found ways, in my understanding, of dealing with spent fuel rods and things like that. The waste, which has always been a real touchy topic with the old style of nuclear power plants. So I think it's a fascinating topic. Just getting caught up with where you folks have already traveled down that rabbit hole, so to speak. So thank you.
There is a nuclear power plant in Blair, Nebraska, but I don't know if that is still in function. If they're dismantling that or what is going on there, but
It's being decommissioned.
decommissioned. And did that have any negative effect on the environment? Any record of that?
Yeah, I don't have data specific to that system, but in the annotated bibliography that was put in the backup material for this meeting, it's very fascinating how the industry as a whole, we look through it as being a highly regulated industry from the federal that talks about a pretty good safety record. It's one of those, we oftentimes hear about the big events like in Japan, et cetera, but overall the percentage of safety record is pretty good in the long run throughout history. It's just that the big things make noise, obviously, and they should when there's big events like that in Japan. The other thing that I think it would pop up is concern would be the spent material and kind of the conversation on storage. And I think that we've got to be very careful on parsing out the very levels of government on what they're responsible and what they do. And I think as this debate or discussion advances through Woodbury County, I think it's very apparent for the commission and the supervisors to be very aware that this is a multi-jurisdictional situation, and Woodbury County, especially from the direction that came from the board, is looking at how can we facilitate an environment. If the public is on board with this, the constituents are on board with this, how do we facilitate an environment that goes through the proper regulation channels at the federal level and the state level, but yet is efficient? And what I mean by efficient, I mean, is there a streamlined process? If this becomes a popular item with the Woodbury County public, how do we have a process that says, hey, Woodbury County is open for business for this level of energy being brought to this community? I think that's the big part of this. And the reason I'm trying to be careful on the definite answers as far as the big plants and the smaller plants is they are very different as far as the level of regulation. And I think here we sit here now in 2025. I've had people generally talk about the length of how long it could take to get a project. If somebody came tomorrow and said, yeah, we want to look at a project, I've heard folks say it could be a matter of years. And the question is, how many years? Could it be 12 years, 18 years, 20 years, or what the smaller modular? Are we going to continue to learn in the literature that it might be 5 or 6 years or even less? So I think those are the things that we have to be aware of. But I think at this moment in time where we're having the conversation, this is a precursor to eventually having a project. And I'll tell you, I really appreciate the supervisors bringing this to us, because it could have been the other way. We could have been sitting here just alone with the current process we have now, a conditional use permit. They just file the application like everybody. Then we're out there doing, the research on that project. And I think it would catch the public off guard real quick if, hey, we have a project here, nuclear plant. I think that level of engagement, a lot of times, unfortunately, in public policy, policy can be reactive too much versus proactive. And we get much more turnout when we're reacting to something and we're generally not happy with that process that got us to that point. So I think that the supervisors took a really good action on saying, hey, zoning commissioners, look at this now. Even though, because we do have a permitting mechanism in there, but with that permitting mechanism in there, you could still bring about questions. Is this, it's in there as electrical energy generation likely or likewise? Can we debate this? Is electrical energy generation, does that meet the definition? So we're in there kind of parsing language versus maybe coming forward with a direct policy. And I think that's where it puts us at right now. In a way, we're kind of sitting in like a conditional use permit chair without a project. We're just trying to look at hypotheticals. A lot of times folks say, oh, hypotheticals aren't a good thing, but they can be definitely sometimes. And I think that that's where we're at right now. And so I think we can zero in on projects. At this point, I've looked at it much more globally versus kind of zooming in on the specific project. And I think that's our greatest challenge right now, is specific to project or kind of the wide scope. And when you even look at the Biden administration memo, it looks, nuclear, and this modular nuclear is relatively new in the scheme of things. And so I think we zero in on it and kind of find out a route that we go. But we always are in danger of leaving it open broadly. I mean, we could put nuclear energy facilities in there and leave it broadly, but we're always going to be examining the specifics of the project and how it's going to go in the area. I mean, I've sat there and I've looked at our industrial area and I thought, if we drop it here at this location, hypothetically, how is it going to impact that area? How is the federal government going to look at that as far as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? How is it going to affect our emergency department? Mr. Montino there, it would probably change a lot for him as far as that relationship there. And he would probably very likely, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but probably likely need more resources through his department to govern these aspects of it. So that's why I do think that you're a very key role there. And if the commission would let me, I'd love to ask him the question, how would a potential nuclear, whether it be the big one or the modular, how would that affect you and your department and your role in leading the charge from there?
Do I gotta be red or do I gotta be
Yeah,
clear?
it's on.
Okay, it's on. So you're talking about a couple of different technologies here, and I think how it would look actually looks very different depending on the technology, but at the same time, it's all powered by uranium-235, which is very strictly controlled, and if it gets into the wrong hands or if it gets released, is very, very dangerous to public safety. So the technology has gotten much, much better over the last 2 decades. I can tell you that for sure. These small modular reactors, they've actually gotten to the point, and apparently some of the models, if you were to shut them down, they can continue to cool themselves via gravity-fed cooling systems, which eliminates some of the problems like what we saw in Japan. Now, if we have a gigawatt, that giant nuclear reactor that has the cooling tower and everything else, one of the issues and one of the concerns that I have is I was exchanging emails today with the National Weather Service. Apparently our river gauge, the Missouri River, because of the ice jam this last weekend, it got down to 3 feet. Normal is like 8 or 9 feet at that gauge. So if we do have a large nuclear reactor and we run out of water for whatever reason, whether it be a freeze or they got to stop it up at the dam, we have some pretty significant issues. And as you also alluded to, this isn't just Woodbury County anymore. When we're talking about nuclear, we're talking about probably several dozen counties across 3 states with the feds involved as well. So it would be quite a process.
Could you describe the water needs between the big ones would take a lot of water, obviously. And how about the small modular nuclear? Is that something that water is not so much an emphasis on?
So most nuclear reactors are what are considered light water reactors, so they use normal water to cool. The bigger the reactor, the more water that you need to cool it naturally. However, there's also been some advancements over the last couple of years that I don't know if they actually have one in play yet, but they can use helium to be cooled as well. So you don't need nearly as much water, which would be good for us, but I don't know if there's an expense component to that as well.
Are there any hurdles that you see that are insurmountable that, I guess would be, I don't know how to say it. I guess I'm just asking you, I know you're concerned because there are concerns, but,
Mhm.
is there anything that you're aware of, or is there any other, information that you've received that indicates that you just have a hard time being on board with the nuclear power?
No, I actually don't have any significant concerns as so long as safety is taken into account. And whoever happens to pick up this project, should they, works with us as local government. I think nuclear is a very safe and sustainable solution.
Cause like, and I'm sure, at the federal level, local, you're gonna have to work with a lot of agencies to promote this and to go forward. So you would lose some control, but you'd also have some say in the matter on the local aspect, I would assume.
Well, and that's a good thing with nuclear, that you have multiple checks and balances, and the control not only comes from us at the local level, but it comes from the state, federal level, and the private sector. So you'll have multiple levels of oversight kind of watching this operation to ensure that it is safe for our citizens.
This is very premature, but has anybody looked at a possible site in Woodbury County yet?
No, this whole thing is kind of looking at the prospect. I think it really grew out of, I remember at the time Supervisor Radig had mentioned, we've looked at these different types of energy over the last several years. And it's sort of like, I don't know if I quote him correctly, he kind of said, it's now nuclear's turn, or we looked at these aspects and nuclear is definitely one of those respective options. And so he envisioned seeing the zoning commission kind of go over this. And one of the roles of the commission is to ask the public generally their viewpoints. And I would say reflective off of the past debates, I would say one of the central aspects of the solar debate last year was a discussion on agricultural preservation. How do we preserve our agricultural land? And the distinguishing factor of that debate was solar panels can take X amount of acres out of the farm production. And so at that time, it was decided that, and in fact, it was our existing policy that solar electrical energy generation goes directly in the general industrial area. The way Woodbury County is designed, our general industrial area is predominantly that area south of the Sioux Gateway Airport and west of the Interstate 29 corridor. So we have a county that very much contains that industrial activity, while much of our ag land is predominantly the majority of the county surrounding our other communities. And by the level of folks that engaged us on both the wind energy, they engaged the supervisors and engaged the commission in particular on the solar, I think, and of course, the comprehensive plan that came out last year as well, it was very glaringly from the folks that were engaged in the process, a glaring argument that agricultural preservation is an area that generally the public doesn't want to see, at least for that matter, solar or wind on to the extent of going through this. Now, with that said, if we tie something to general industrial, then we're limited to that area. So the area kind of north of Browns Lake in that area would be possibility, kind of near where the coal plants are now. would at least be in my mind somewhere down there for consideration of nuclear based on what the public said at this point. But I do think going back to the purpose of our last public hearing and this one and going forward is there anybody from the public that would come forward and say, oh, I love nuclear, let's put it on AP? That's something we're not saying we're doing that by any means, but is there going to be a change in that viewpoint or not? Or are we looking at nuclear for general industrial? And that's where I want to continue to learn more about the smaller, the modular nuclear, as far as X amount of acres, how much land would a compound or a facility take away and out of commission, and how far can a member of the public reside away from that nuclear plant. So I think some of those are different aspects, but the general industrial is set up for us in a way that it keeps housing generally out of that area. But I will caution everybody that we have a lot of legal non-conforming. We got to be very careful, but that's the new term for saying grandfathered as far as housing. There's some housing yet in that industrial area where folks are still farming that. So there would be considerations there, I think, as far as the location of some of those nuclear plants. So with that, I'd like to kind of segue and ask Michael if you've had any engagement or seen anything about separation distances from the public as far as housing or in relationship to nuclear.
Not necessarily separation distances, but should we have a problem, I would have to do emergency planning zones to plan for people to shelter in place. I want to say it's 50 miles now. It's 25 or 50, depending on the size of the plant. But basically, we would have to have a specific plan for those residents, those businesses, should we have a significant emergency in which nuclear material were to escape its containment. Which, fingers crossed, never happens. The other thing that I just want to bring up, and naturally I'm more on the safety side, with any kind of nuclear facility, you're going to take on some sort of risk, right? It doesn't matter if it's a nuclear power plant or a nuclear warhead. You know, nuclear material is nuclear material. The technology has gotten really, really good. But what I encourage you to ask, and you were talking about John Locke, I love John Locke and contract law, but also consequentialist ethics. What does Woodbury County get, and the residents in Woodbury County get, out of taking on this risk? Does the benefit that the citizens get outweigh the risk? There is no doubt in my mind, and you know, it's on the news, you hear politicians across the country talking about it, that there is an energy shortage here in the United States. However, a lot of people have no idea where their energy actually comes from. And a lot of people think, well, if I go over to Mid-America right now, over to that coal plant, and I flip the switch, that just everybody in Woodbury County is going to go dark. Well, there's a good possibility that nobody in Woodbury County is going to go dark because it all supports a greater grid, right? So is the energy that we would produce from this, is it going to lower the cost of energy for Woodbury County residents? Or is it supporting our infrastructure? Or is it just something else that's going to be exported out of Woodbury County without much of a repayment to us? Naturally, you also got to look at how many jobs would it produce. If we're talking a large scale nuclear power plant, hundreds, right? If we're talking a small modular plant, I don't really know because they're not all that common. Maybe it's 20 people. Maybe it's less than that. So those are questions to ask as well going forward. Is the benefit worth the risk of having nuclear in your area of jurisdiction?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And if I would comment that sometimes it's tougher without the project stuck in there on what we would know about the project when we are hypothetically looking at, you know, this, and this. And so I'm kind of trying to model or seeing what a small would look like or a large would look like. But I couldn't tell you at this point what the the political will is for the larger ones. It seems like the modular may be catching on as far as the literature that's been developed kind of at this time. So I think, this debate is, in a sense, creating some type of environment and some level of expectation if somebody were to submit an application in. I mean, we're so used to somebody filing a conditional use permit with us, whatever project it is, and somehow we know the scope, we know the layout, how it's going to fit in there right now. And so even with Supervisor Carper's kind of question there on where would we put it, we're still just generally looking at the outer shell as far as a policy environment. So when they come knocking and asking us, can we put this there? That's where I think we've got to be, wide open enough, but yet careful as far as the policies that we put in place. And I think the spirit of our zoning ordinance historically, and this has been debated quite a bit, is we've had the conditional use permit in there as a way to be open up and loose enough, but yet we control the information that comes to us as far as we need this application, we need these specifications, we request these materials through the conditional use permit so that we can learn enough about the project to make a good, strong decision that once it gets through the Board of Adjustment. And going back to our solar debate, the solar debate ultimately ended up exactly where we were as far as having a conditional use permit, but it amplified that, hey, you got to do some decommissioning, you got to go to the Board of Supervisors, and we put the building permit or the actual structure authority in the Board of Supervisors' hands and basically created a partnership between the Zoning Commission, Board of Adjustment, and Board of Supervisors. So from the zoning seat, I'm looking at how do we, facilitate a permitting infrastructure that we stick Project X in there, and how does Project X come out of that? Are we going to have enough tools there to refine that as we make a local decision on that that's compatible with what the feds expect out of us, and as well as probably the utilities board and the state. So
The other aspect that, is going to be potentially impactful on this discussion is the winds of change have certainly come in the last few weeks in our country regarding energy. Our new president has pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. He has basically stated the Green New Deal is dead. Nuclear energy, I don't think is considered, is not considered a, it was never part of the Green New Deal because it's been around a long time, right? But it's going to be interesting to see, how that happens. He's already talked, drill, baby, drill. We're going to get the coal business back on track again and things like that. So it's just going to be interesting because nuclear is obviously part of our entire energy, source, so to speak. So,
yeah, generally, what I think what we witnessed in the last few days and looking at, I'm very curious to see the literature over the next few weeks and months, because public policy is typically slow, but yet I think there's going to be a lot of different reactions. I think there's been a few nuclear comments out there. I've been trying to keep search terms going out there as far as what the most up-to-date modern information is. And I think there's been a few words out there. I can't say specific to an actual policy goal that's come out of the feds yet. There's definitely been a lot of executive orders on different issues. And so curtailing back on what that Green New Deal versus what we're left with now will be very fascinating, because it definitely wasn't a White House memo that we had in the packet from last year as far as the carbon neutral aspects of it, but there wasn't a lot of I would say a lot of energy thrusts behind it. And I think that the whole nuclear industry, back to your original question on when was the last one, I think there's been more of a reluctance or a hesitancy for quite some time. And I do think that the literature reflects that. And so that to me is why these public hearings are so important as far as a communication channel on what the expectation is coming directly from our public. So there will be a lot of, I think lot more information based on the new administration flowing around about new energy solutions. I've definitely heard a lot about the AI stuff going on, and we know that this AI is taking a lot of energy to empower these plants that they put into place to offer this energy. And in the past, I've heard the other forms of energy being used to support the AI, but it'll be interesting to see if nuclear becomes much more of a national conversation as we're looking at this nuclear energy. I do think the White House put something out the other day on $1 billion initiatives on AI stuff. So if you're asking for more AI, you're likely asking for more energy. And again, I think that kind of goes into what Michael had said about what are the community benefits as a whole. Specifically, if you just put one in, is there going to be an actual effect here? And I think with everything said here tonight, we also always have to keep in mind in any public policy, are there any shortfalls, the law of unintended consequences? Is there something, if we do this, how's it affecting something over here? And I think that's where we got to look at this as being very mindful, conscientious, and really hearing people out. And not to judge on the crowd tonight, I think that
There is no crowd. How do you judge?
I think that there's,
I'm
you know,
sorry.
I
I'm sorry.
would be afraid to, jump to a decision yet with such minimal crowds at this point in time. And we don't want a situation where we don't refine it enough, then we send it up to the Board of Supervisors, and then all of a sudden they get the crowds. The idea is to get the crowds here and assist them as well. And we learned that with the wind debate as well. The more you refine a policy here at the commission level, the better off we are as a community, and the better off the supervisors are on studying what happens here, because they do. They study what we do here, and they study what's before them as well. So that's the beauty of local government closest to the people.
And I think maybe one of the reasons that we're not getting as much show right now is just because of the fact that there's so much with the technology out there. You're talking something brand new that's this big, and a traditional classic nuclear power plant. Maybe way to go about it is, hey, we'll accept proposals, but then we're going to have our separate committee process to review that specific proposal. Hey, we're going to get one of those modular ones. They've been used before. They're pretty safe. That might be a no-brainer for us versus, hey, this is an experimental technology. We've never seen it before, but we'd like to put it in Sioux City before we put in New York. What do you guys say to that?
Yeah.
So, joking aside, just looking at all of that, Steve, to your comment with nuclear, a lot of its benefit goes to its energy density and its ability to lower costs. If you hold out your thumb, that's about the size of one of the pellets of uranium-235, and hundreds of those go in a reactor. That size pellet will power your house for 2 years, and we'll only have to switch them out every 3 years. Versus you think of how much coal would be required to power just your own house alone for 2 years. That's the benefit, and that's what's saving people a lot of money for going to nuclear.
I guess one thing I just mentioned, there was a lot of safety issues brought up with the wind turbines and just different, setbacks and public safety. But, not to say that nuclear is a higher risk, but the risk potential for damage is a lot worse. What'd you say, 50 miles for a shelter in place in an emergency situation. So it involves a lot more people on that aspect. It may be safer than, more people might have an issue with a wind turbine than they would with a nuclear reactor. But if it does happen, worst case scenario is what we got to look at.
Any other comments by the questions by the commissioners? Nothing? Okay. Do we need to go out of the public hearing, or do we?
I think
I have tons of questions. but I don't want to hold up everybody. You know, we can bring this up at a later meeting. I'm not sure if you're going to end at 6 or that's the plan. But,
We can't do
Um,
that with the amount of
I'm not sure.
agenda items we have at the moment, but
you know, I can make comments about wind energy, hydroelectric power and solar, but I can save it for another time too. So.
okay. Anybody else? Do we have to make a
Um,
motion to go out?
yeah,
Public meeting?
Yeah, you can probably close the public meeting, but I would have to say that I would probably suggest we just put this on the agenda and kind of continue it next month and try to,
See if we can get someone to participate.
I will, please comment, everybody, please. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you count,
You,
you count.
Thank you, sir.
Duly noted.
yeah.
Okay,
So-
so could I get a motion to close the public hearing, please?
I'd make a motion to close the public hearing.
Can I get a second, please?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is a public hearing action item, proposed zoning ordinance, text amendment, dimensional size for single-family dwellings. Dan, do you want to read that information into the record?
Yes. Okay, the Woodbury County, tonight's public hearing is to discuss potential changes to section 4.11, single-family detached dwellings in Woodbury County zoning ordinance. Again, we want to collect input from the public on revising potentially dimensional requirements for dwellings, not limited to regulations in section 4.11. The review will consider whether to amend 4.11, the section that states that the main body shall have a minimum dimension of not less than 23 feet. Potential revisions may involve eliminating, reducing, modifying, or adding to the minimum dimension requirement, as well as other changes to the contents and its subsections. And again, any amendment would consist of adding new sections, definitions, renumbering, reorganization of the content within the respective zoning ordinance. I do want to mention that this was brought to us again by the Board of Supervisors to look at. We did have a meeting back in, I believe, our last one in November to look at that minimum dimension and looking at it. Of course, this involves various sections, of course, of the zoning ordinance that was referenced there, as well as Iowa Code 335.3. And it looks like back in 2008, when this new ordinance was adopted, they were very mindful at the time about the regulations as far as your manufactured, your modular and mobile homes. There's some state standards and federal standards through HUD that require that these type of structures not be discriminated against in any form of building. So you don't go and kind of classify the structure in a particular manner. And so they came to the 23 feet as a generally a building standard across the board. And in this era today, there's been much more discussions about the tiny homes and the mobile home kind of concept. And you could make an argument that mobile homes, in a sense, could fit in that tiny homes kind of category there. And so this number here, we're looking at as far as what would the ramifications be as far as potentially removing that number or revising that number. And what we've kind of found is that's a mechanism that is put into place as far as affecting the mobile home situation. Like a single wide would not meet that definition under the 23 feet. And so in effect, it kind of takes that out of commission for being put on a specific lot. And so all of our much of our zoning lots across the county are your agricultural preservation, agricultural estates, and suburban residential zoning district are the three that we have in order to get a building permit for a single family dwelling. And so a permit could not be issued as far as for a single wide, basically on that definition. Any of the single wides that you see out there have likely been either before this ordinance or under the agricultural exemption where a farmer is likely using it for the cultivation of crops or cattle or supporting their farm. And with that said, this is in a sense a continuation of where we were last month on this issue. And I would basically say the chair would probably be a good time to open it up for the public.
Okay, the public meeting is open.
My name is Jeannie Kruger. This is my husband, Ronnie. We live at 3079 255th Street, Anthon, which is 4 miles east of Climbing Hill. We have 7 acres. Our 21-year-old grandson currently lives with us, and we're the ones that brought this up to you. We thought we could put a single wide trailer house, brand new, on 2 or 3 acres, whatever we had to have, sell to him, put water, sewer, everything on there, so he could have affordable housing. Any place in Anthon costs $1,000 a month to rent, and his money's gone. He could own this trailer and the 2 acres and a horse and be there on his own. He plans on buying our acreage when we're older than what we are now, hopefully. And he is there to help us with the acreage. He's not working for us per se. I could have lied to the zoning commission and said, yes, he's going to work for us, but he's not. We want him to own his own home, but your qualifications of the 24 feet, it wasn't a square footage because we had a brand new home, 16 by 70 located to put up there, and we can't because of this ordinance. That's where we're at. So I would like to see it modified so we could put a single wide trailer up there for him on his own acreage that he could afford to live in, because payments on all of this would be less than renting a house in Anthon. So rent has gone ridiculous. That's
Any questions or
I don't know if
comments?
you got any questions for me, but that's where we're at. And that's why we brought this up, because when I went to get the zoning and everything to get this trailer up there, he put the down payment on it and everything already. I come up to the zoning, I don't know where I came, and they said you can't. So I said, that's not really very fair.
Ron Kruger, and I reside in the same spot. I know when we started out young, no money, just like all the rest of the kids, that was our affordable housing, is a trailer. And I don't have enough fingers or toes to list all the people that started out that way. And we'd like to be able to get him started. And that's where we're at. So, thank you.
Commissioners, questions, comments?
Well, if I may, yeah, that's one of the situations with unfortunately, the way the zoning ordinance is at times, we put those standards in that kind of balancing out the law of unintended consequences, again, if I may use that word. The community, when that ordinance was put together, weighed that kind of based upon the level of what was going on at the time, likely based upon a development plan, comprehensive plan, what type of zoning districts that we have and what the expectations are for the level of housing. And I think that what makes it tougher is the federal involvement through HUD and the other layers of government as far as not being able to treat the structure or the home differently. It basically says in there, you can't discriminate against different types So you have to treat the mobile home exactly the way you do with the other structure. And so it was generated based on that. If you have to treat everybody exactly the same way, you use a minimum dimension as a way to control the expectations of size in housing. And because we have to treat every single thing equal across the board, they put that in there. And looking at things kind of across the board, this could equate to our requirement of one house, one lot, and where you locate the structure, whether it be a mobile home, you could end up with a mobile home maybe put in this neighborhood or this neighborhood. And so now you're not classifying based upon the actual structure design. You have to classify them equal. And we all know that subdivisions at times can go to covenants level and put restrictions in on how they want their home or their local community based on lots. So in a sense, you could end up with a scenario where there's a lot of public disagreement as far as the makeup of the neighborhood if we removed that dimension. So for example, a mobile home in this area next to this expectation of this grade of houses or whatever. And so now because we're treating house number A that might be in the $800,000 range next to a mobile home in the community there, and let's say there's no covenants is there, the county would be ultimately permitting based on that. And I'm only bringing that up is because that's been a mechanism that has been used as far as that dimension on the actual size of the home, the size. And again, we're not saying that a mobile home causes that, because somebody could go build a non-mobile home that's smaller in size and be classified in the tiny. So it kind of throws everything smaller into that same boat and creates that consequence. Now, with that said, they have a legitimate statement there as far as, you know, the size and starting out. And there's been a lot of different viewpoints on tiny home communities and different sizes. So then again, we're classifying again differently, and that's where we've got to be careful. And so I'll just kind of cleanly say that the 23 has simply been used as a consistent line in the sand standard for the size of the house, not purposely to restrict the specific manufactured or mobile, because you technically can't, but it definitely prevents that. And that's where that's kind of the catch 22 kind of in the whole cycle. That's where there ultimately is an issue there. But ultimately the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance, and our zoning ordinance has different expectations for agricultural estates, suburban residential, for what's expected in those communities. But yet this number dictates entirely what goes into there. So it's muddled and messy, but at the same time, it's very clear that we use a minimum dimension for consistency across the board. And because of the consistency, if we were to put a 0 in there, we might very well be having neighbor A and neighbor B and a high level of engagement, and neighbors not being happy with what their neighbor is building next door based upon the allowance of what's out there. And so that's the law of unintended consequences as far as having that consistent standard. And it is a very challenging aspect, absolutely, because it can definitely change the entire housing outlook and the housing culture of the entire county just based on that one number alone. And so that would be my general comments.
I have a question. Do single wides typically fall underneath that 23-foot?
They would typically fall under that 23.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Is this the first application that you're aware of?
Yeah, this
came.
this would be the only one. Yeah.
Okay.
Has there been a lot of demand at
I-
all? This is it.
I haven't heard much except for, of course, what was brought to me by the Krugers and as well as the supervisors asking us to look at that.
Okay.
And this is being built on an acreage out in the country, correct?
Yes, it is. And I would also say that maybe the reason you haven't heard of any of them, because had I taken what they told me when I came up and just taken that as, okay, that's fine, I'd have gone home and tried to do something else. But in my thinking, this is not fine. So I know Mark Nelson personally. So I thought, I'm going to call and see, because it wasn't square footage, because it was 16 by 70. So it wasn't the square footage. It was just the width. And yes, he could have built something on the whole length to make it 24-foot wide, but that defeats the 23 foot. That defeats the purpose of buying the single wide and being able to afford it. So had I just gone home, you wouldn't be hearing from me either, but I was not willing to accept that, what they told me. So, and yes, most of your single wides are 16, 17, 18 feet wide
But you're doing exactly what you should be doing, which is engaging the
in
county
the conversation.
and
instead of just
getting us
guessing.
in the conversation. And I appreciate you doing that. In this situation, with a single wide, brand new one being built, in a rural environment, you're not in town, you're not necessarily, it's always about your neighbors, right? And that type of thing. I'm just, I'm new to this, curious, how, something like this, is the zoning commission able to make exceptions in these kind of scenarios, or do we I'm asking the question.
Yeah, this is one of those standards that affect the entire community as a whole. And the design of the Woodbury County ordinance doesn't have a lot of pathways for them. And that's an important element of why you come to the commission and point that out. I would say that the only way to waive an ordinance requirement is through the variance criteria. However, under a variance, a person can bring an application to the Board of Adjustment, but if it's something that doesn't show enough of a hardship, typically like an economic hardship or a practical difficulty directly, they're tough to pass. And we've all seen kind of historically, especially with our Iowa State training that we get once in a while, you avoid variances as much as possible unless there is a true hardship that is built in. If you get in the habit of approving variances that don't even meet the court standards, because there's been some court cases in Iowa that have scrutinized the awarding of a variance out of the Board of Adjustment. I think there was something where an awning or something off of the house went too far one way at one point, and the courts kind of go back and they look at it under the definition of some type of economic hardship. And kind of where the rubber meets the road is the courts would look at it. What are the basic zoning rules? Oh, you have 23 feet there. That's a standard across the board. And they would probably likely ask you, well, you can maybe buy something at 23. I don't want to be, sound that way, but they would look at it from that element on whether it's a practical difficulty or a hardship. Setbacks are most of the time a situation that we run through the Board of Adjustment quite a bit. If somebody has can't meet the 100 feet or or a setback, we see those kind of the most frequently where there's a practical difficulty or hardship. And one of the most fascinating variances I've ever encountered was somebody had a real nice 2-acre parcel. We know that 2 acres is our minimum for putting a lot on. And they had a creek going through it. And the creek was not in the floodplain because it was so deep down. The elevation was so high up. And this creek cut through the middle of the lot and sliced the setback to the point that you have the 100 feet in AP, and it was a non-farmer. They came in and they asked for a setback, I think, dropped down to 45 versus 100, something like that. first thing that we do is we try to find a practical difficulty or a hardship. And it wasn't the landowner's fault that they put that creek in there. I mean, the creek was put in there naturally. And so with that said, there was a practical difficulty there based on an ordinance said that we have to go to 100. Well, the applicant drew the hardship by showing the house they were going to build was sitting in the creek by if it met the setback. So basically they drew a site plan. I'd like to build my house in the creek. We know that don't work. And so that showed a hardship or a practical difficulty as far as meeting the 2 acre minimum, but not having the ability to have that. And so a variance, you know, is something a person can try. A person can apply for it regardless of what the zoning standard is. But that's a $400 application. And if the case isn't very strong, that's a kind of a tough route to pursue. But that's the only other way that zoning or a board of adjustment could alleviate that without a citizen-wide approach. If the board of adjustment in their regulations, they have it written in there that they look at everything on a case-by-case basis. Everything is a unique individual project based on the area of the land. And so the board of adjustment is not in the business of starting a precedent. We relieved this on this one issue, but they got to do it. Why can't I do it? Well, that's the most famous thing we hear in zoning. They did it, I can't do it, but everything depends upon that situation. I'm saying this because I want you to be aware that there's variances out there, but it's I can't speak for how anybody would interpret things, but I do know that the practical difficulty is difficult to achieve. The other thing that we don't do is we don't get in the way of saying that don't apply for this or don't apply for that. Everybody has the right to apply for a variance and try it, but the interpretation standard is very tough. So I think that, and of course, you referenced talking to Supervisor Nelson, and he understands very well, as all the supervisors do, that when something is an individual standard like that, it does involve the zoning commission as far as trying to understand if it is a huge issue or a problem that kind of affects people across the board. And I think it was presented to us in the agenda item that, you know, a smaller dimension could be something to look at as far as housing, affordable housing, and from that perspective there. So I think it's reasonable to look at it and to discuss it, but I think when it's looked at, we got to look at the law of unintended consequences. And one of the biggest things in unincorporated areas that don't have building codes, that's it. We don't have building codes in Woodbury County. So that ties our hands. We can't go out and condemn houses and things like that. We don't have that ability. And so when you allow for all these different creative sizes of structures, we don't even allow you to put a shed on there without a house under the rules. And so when we alleviate one thing, we've got to look at the unintended consequences of the big picture. Whether you live next to Sergeant Bluff or whether you live out past Norfolk Mobile, it's tough to have the top-down standard across the board, but that's kind of where we fall into. But I think it's a reasonable conversation to have if the community came out, you know, really strongly on some of these issues. I think it would definitely help the cause, but a lot of times when we don't have a huge room full, it's tough, but we can definitely, I would say, keep it open as a thing of consideration if we had a lot more input. But it's not my role to make those decisions. It's the role of our community and our commissions and our supervisors to kind of keep that up for being pondered.
Any questions or comments now?
Yeah. Excuse me.
Sorry, commissioners? Anything?
So, you know, I'm just wondering, is there any way around this that we can help this family? you know, can you make an alteration on the structure itself? Can you get this money back that you've invested? You know, I'm just wondering,
We haven't got any money invested at
I
this
thought you
point.
made a down payment on it.
They did, but they, gave it back to
They
us.
gave you the money.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And then this says that the main body shall have a minimum dimension of not less than 23 feet. So this was a single wide
Yes,
and it was
16 feet wide,
16 feet wide.
70 feet long.
Okay. And then this dimension cannot be less than 23 feet. And then you said the dimensions were 16 by 70.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Wide trailers are 60 to 80.
Okay.
And yes, the double wide is an option. Number one, he doesn't need that much trailer. Number two, it's twice as expensive.
I don't know. I'm just trying to,
We just want the dimensions lowered to 16 feet, 15 or 16 feet.
think of a way to help this family.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel like it's, do you want to say something, Tom?
I guess I got a question for Dan on the dimension standards, the 23 by 23, even if the additional trailer was 62 or whatever it is, would fall into a qualifying structure.
Yeah,
Is
that's the challenge. They put the 23 in there as the minimum dimension. So that basically implies that it's 23 by 23 because you can't go below 23.
But
on
not the whole structure would have to meet that
Yes.
standard
The,
then?
the whole structure.
If the
and-
main body was 23 by 23, but the additions off it could be less?
The way that says it's got to have that continuous perimeter affix that's 23 by 23 kind of makes that a bit more challenging as far as permitting that. When we look at the, and I think that's a good point, because if you do the math and you times it by the larger dimension, you can have the square footage argument for sure. And that's a good argument. But going back to the 23 and the rationale why it was put in there, and I think it's fair to say that it's pretty much, again, we're barred from interpreting manufactured and modular and mobile differently because HUD and the upper levels in government, the state and HUD, both say that a county can't come in and create a mobile home rule. You can't do that. You can't have a manufactured rule. And so they used the 23. It was instituted in there, and I got to be careful because I didn't witness it happen, but it was likely put in there as a form of controlling those smaller structures from popping up in neighborhoods. It was meant to somehow keep some level of standard uniform across. Believe me, I see the argument on all sides of it. The level of freedom in unincorporated, but yet the level of, standard. And historically, kind of when zoning started out, we had some ordinances that attached regulations. And I think a lot of, when I look at some of the older subdivision covenances, and we've seen a lot of, I think they're 22, 20, 21, 22 years when they can expire. Basically what happens is a community plats an area and the proprietors decide, oh, we're going to have our own rules. You can have this color of awning or this size of fence. They have to meet the requirement of the jurisdiction which they're in, but they can tighten up the rules within their own living community. And at that time in the mid 70s to 80s, I look at some of the subdivisions out there in Woodbury County that later on expired. There was a strong where the proprietor would go in there and they were really sensitive to different land use things that would go on. A lot of them would say no racetracks, no, I think they would even reference structure sizes, shed sizes. So they were really particular about that. And that was within proprietors within their own community. So I think we got to be really careful on structure sizes because of the law and unintended consequences. You put in a new subdivision down, let's just say off of Sergeant Bluff, and you put 12 lots in, and everybody within the neighborhood, you know, you can buy this lot, and then somebody decides, oh, I'm gonna go ahead and build my own 16 by, maybe it's not a mobile home, maybe they're just gonna build it that size or whatever. Maybe the other neighbors would not like that so much, and then you can create that, you know, citizenry tug of war, which we try to avoid. We try to find the middle ground on everything as much as possible. And that's why we have a comprehensive plan. That's why we try to have ordinances that kind of reflect generally at the time of what the people want. And that's why we try to be very careful when we make changes that larger amounts of the community are involved. That's kind of zoning 101 in the sense of you don't legislate for the whole population based on a few circumstances, even though I fully respect exactly what you're saying. And so I would say that if there's a way to look at this further, like we are with the nuclear, and leaving it open for further comment and see if there's further demand out there as far as this type of thing. Because I do think affordable housing is something that people are concerned about. And so it's definitely a tough call in those scenarios. But at the same time, we do have that 23-foot in there for various reasons, including some type of common standard on where you at least start for the size of house. But the numbers can be subjective though at times. You look at how is 23 any better than 16 or, you know, 17? We can definitely get into those arguments, but that's where the line was put in the sand at that time.
Proposed residential structures, but you disallowed a 16-foot mobile home because of your regulation of the 23-foot. You've disallowed the single wide.
Unfortunately, a zoning standard, whether it's a setback, a specific size, a height, and that standard falls across all dwellings, including the mobile home. That's why a double wide would work. We don't have any building codes. It's just that we're not specifically singling out that manufactured or that modular on that in that code section. It's still being treated as far as it'd be allowed to be permitted as long as it met that size dimension. So technically it's not being singled out. I'm just saying that that's one of the consequences of having that number. And that's why I do think it merits discussion and still consideration.
Dan, I got a question.
Yeah.
So this home that you're proposing is on its own parcel?
It will be.
What is the rule, and I might have the term wrong, a mother-in-law home?
Well,
Is that an option where there would not be a size and that could be on the same property?
as far as the conditional, we do have, if it stayed on the same parcel, the conditional use permit for a relative or worker. But we still have section 4.11 that directly ties into the detached dwelling, the detached single-family dwelling. So you could still argue that living dwellings and structures have to have that size. You could put that argument out there as far as the permitting of that structure. And that's the challenge. You'd have to go to the zoning commission with the proposal. Then you bring it to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment could ultimately look at that. Then the Board of Adjustment could, be tasked with making that call or making that determination. But I do think that under 4.11, it's pretty clear that these dwellings have to meet that. And one of the things that we caution people on, and I haven't been involved with one of those permits where you put a house on a parcel and the Board of Adjustment approves it. but you have to look at the long-term consequences. If somebody moves away from that house and they sell it, what happens to the next person that uses that? Do you get depending on how the Board of Adjustment writes their resolution? And I would always advise people, if you're going to put something on the same lot, make sure you position it in a way that if you ultimately split the parcel later on, that you could likely sell it off for a resale value. Otherwise, it can create a lot of consequences like ag exemption can, as far as splitting off the property. But
So I was on the Board of Adjustments for nearly a dozen years, and I cannot recall a variance that we passed that was a financial burden. I remember variances that passed, as he stated, with the creek or placement of properties. I do remember, and is the term a mother-in-law home? Is that what it's called?
it could be.
I
mean,
can't
it's
remember
a
the
sentiment.
exact words, but I do remember one of those being passed with language in there that if that person no longer lived there, it wouldn't be valid ananymore,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
It's sunset.
That language was put in there.
Sunset.
Yeah. But if that's the route you choose to go variance, I know you want it on a separate parcel, but if it's on the same parcel, it would have a better chance. I'm not saying that it would, but
That's fine.
we don't represent that. I'm just saying for
Right.
past experience.
This ground that we're on, my great grandfather bought it in 1911.
To change.
George
the
Lyons
zoning
homesteaded
to
it.
one person.
George Lyons moved on it
I mean.
and was in a dugout. Then he built the log cabin. Then he built the big house.
See it?
But I mean, this is
It's up to you.
what we're looking at. And we're gonna take over the whole farm whenever dad passes away, mom. They're 90-some years old. So we're looking at taking the whole farm over. But Christian, our grandson, who wants the trailer to live in, while we still live there, because he wants to take over at least the acreage part of it. So that's what we're looking at, is trying to keep him having it, trying to keep everything in the family. I mean, that's what we're
So let
looking.
me ask you this, and I understand maybe you can't tell me this, but if I decide I want to divorce him and I want to live up there, it's gonna be a financial hardship for me to move off of there because we own the ground. I mean, there's all sorts of scenarios that I could give you that could be financial hardship, but those, number one, those don't help the next guy down the road. Number two, I don't want to go through a whole process to try to get this done and fill out a $400 application and then get denied. I mean, we're just trying to get that minimum down. I mean, because there's probably all sorts of scenarios I could give you, whether it's the mother-in-law thing or we get a divorce and really don't. And I say I'm gonna live up there or something, but I can't afford to move someplace. I still gotta meet the 16-foot regulations or try to get it approved. And what are the chances of that? We don't know.
The challenge is, and I understand obviously where you're coming from, and like you said, it's kind of the application, the variance scenario does put you up against the practical difficulty / hardship. Now, the way those questions are on the application, a person has to lay out details to prove that there's something about the ordinance that it creates a hardship for you in some respect. And that's kind of the challenge there. A person can definitely try to, go that route and have their opportunity to ask the Board of Adjustment to relax that rule. But that's kind of a tough part, because I see that going a few ways, because like Commissioner Meister kind of mentioned, the mother-in-law home or the relative or worker type of thing, that's another level of permitting too, called a conditional use permit. if you were to leave it on the same parcel, and there's a lot of consequences to doing that. And you would almost have to do 2 permits there, like a conditional use permit and a variance. Then the other option is to try to split the lot and ask for a variance under the same realm of the practical difficulty or hardship. But that's really a tough threshold to meet if they can look and see that, oh, that's a 2-acre lot. You could likely meet the 23 feet. So it's a tough one. And that's what I always have to be careful in, is I cannot speak for folks ever that are on these boards. They make the determination. They can fully disagree with my interpretation on things, which is fine. But that's where we got to be kind of careful. And I think that anything that is properly changed or adjusted definitely takes public demand. It takes a lot of citizens to kind of come forward and identify the problem. In the public policy process, we kind of go through a circle of issue identification. And I do think we identified an issue there for sure. And sometimes it's tough to just identify the issue now and, get a low turnout, but maybe, you keep it open a little bit and have another hearings or so to kind of see if there's any larger, but as of right now, it doesn't look like there's a huge public demand, and that puts a lot of us in a tough position as far as making the recommendation,
Well,
as that's one of the chief indicators of public policy change.
And one reason there's not a public demand is because they've taken it out of the picture basically, so no one pursues it.
We just need to go around Woodbury County and get a bunch of people that want to see this changed and bring them back. Right?
But like I think it was mentioned earlier, you couldn't put this trailer in there, put an addition that makes the 23 by 23, and that's still not any good.
You'd have to come up with a continuous perimeter that gets you out to the 23 by
Well,
23.
I guess I don't understand continuous. If you got continuous 23 by 23, but yet the trailer extends out, you still got the base.
You would have to get yourself to a base structure 23 by 23. And of course, we don't have building codes. So you got to come up with something that's like an addition, but that's a really,
Put a 7-foot patio of 70 feet along. It's a question.
well, the ordinance does read that we got to have that continuous of 20. So I start with the square box of the continuous perimeter, and you got to have that as your base structure.
What is continuous?
Yo,
A foundation that is laid down and the house is affixed and built on the permanent foundation.
so we're just at a holding pattern now, or what's the next step?
What do you think? What next? I
It's kind
personally,
of up to the will of the commission.
yeah, personally, I see this ordinance has worked for years. I don't see the demand. I know there are variations. But I don't think it needs to be in our ordinances. There might be other possibilities in other ways, but not to change an ordinance form.
Did I say that right? Can you get a variance on a mother-in-law home on the property or not? On the size, or does it have to meet the ordinance?
If we look at, it would be a conditional use permit for the district. And then we probably have to talk conditional use and variance because of the size.
And then it has to meet the code, the requirements.
Not if it's that could be the variance, right?
The variance would be the structure size
Size.
alone, and then the conditional use would be the whole living there on the same parcel.
Yeah.
So it would have to take zoning commission review for the conditional use permit, board of adjustment approval for that use. But they could file a concurrent variance with the board of adjustment. But again, that practical difficulty. I know you know that well from serving on there. You have to kind of consider that hardship and practical difficulty thing. And again, the Board of Adjustment has granted variances based on numerous cases across the years. It's just I've had these discussions quite a bit and talked to Sioux City the other day about variances too, and we talked about the definition of where the courts have been as far as finding that hardship in terms of either a major practical difficulty or something where this ordinance is keeping them from being able to use their property in a way that they should be able to. And so I think, the challenge is we don't want to give folks false hope either, both ways. People need to get into the idea that there are, potential of issues when you go through these application processes. And that's the first thing I always tell folks going through the conditional use permit. I don't decide on these things, and there's lots of things we can learn through the process of going through both the commission and the Board of Adjustment. So filing any kind of permit or variance request is by no means a guarantee that you're going to get acceptance by the board. So I think that it's absolutely imperative that folks enter that with the understanding that this may not work out versus having the false hope on going through the process. But we do have it specific in there as far as practical difficulty and a hardship, and it's just on the applicant to be able to demonstrate that in some type of fashion that convinces the Board of Adjustment that it's worthy of that. And so that's out of my hands. That's in their hands if you were to want to pursue some route like that. But we always say that folks can do that, and there's definitely been variances that folks have disagreed with. So.
Any other comments, commissioners?
My only comment would be, I think we're not going to solve this tonight, obviously, but I would also like some additional research and direction. And maybe it's from the county attorney's office on whether a 7-foot addition, the length of 23 feet along the main body, not just an overhang or a porch, but actually part of the main body, whether that interpretation actually satisfied the code requirements or not. I think we're making the assumption it does not, but I think it's worth the merit to actually have some additional direction from the attorneys.
We can do that.
I have one comment that's kind of come up to mind in this whole conversation that we're probably going to have to address or talk about eventually is just affordable housing in general. And that's what's coming out of this conversation in my mind. We know where we're at today, right? And what the cost of a home is. And we got these young people trying to make their way. And I certainly understand what these folks are trying to do. I also understand that, we've got policy and ordinances in place, and so it's a big picture scenario, but it's a discussion I think that is worthy down the road for us.
Close the public hearing. Okay. Make the, you want a motion, right? Okay, I'm getting tired, sorry. I need a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is review of zoning commission's rule of procedures for any potential changes not limited to meeting location. It's an action item. Dan, you want to read this into the comments?
Absolutely. Okay, it's always kind of good, I think, at the beginning of the year to look at the rules of procedure for the county. This is kind of toward the back of your packet. The rules of procedure are enumerated in the ordinance to have them where we operate under some type of decorum. The Board of Supervisors have their own as well. The zoning commission, these lay out really what the purpose of this body is, what our membership is, our offices. We elected a chair and vice chair tonight. the meetings, how should a meeting be played out? The administration of business, the powers that reside in the chair, et cetera. And overall, I think they're generally in good shape. And pretty much every year, especially kind of since COVID, more so since we went through much more of the room-filled debates with solar. We've been using this room, and this technology has been much nicer for staff to be able to interpret what the proceedings go on with these meetings. I'm really amazed because what happens after a zoning commission meeting is this audio actually gets converted into the computer, and our zoning commission has a YouTube channel that the proceedings get uploaded to. And YouTube has this nice way of creating transcripts, which allow us to actually extract the meaning that came out of the meeting tonight. And I think it's very important to say that we had some good content here tonight, like we did through the solar debate. And during that time, we extracted the information. I think the Krugers gave us really good information to food for thought to look at tonight and research. And so this equipment and information helps us to really stay sharp and remember what happens here so that we can be best responsive to the public and to our duties. And so this equipment is something we did not have that ability to have upstairs. And I do know that there's times when we've had work sessions and other activities where we've put tables out there on the floor and kind of put people around us. And the danger in this era that we're in now is to post a public hearing, schedule it, and not be able to have the entire public in the room. And that's something that this room guarantees us, that we meet the fire code and things of having larger amounts of people here than we would have up in the Dennis Butler boardroom, where we had traditionally met kind of in the past. And so each year, the chairperson of the Board of Supervisors has allowed us to continue by his own decree that we can meet here to use the technology. So I would probably suggest the commission consider adding something to our meeting on page 2 of the rules of procedure, that under section 2 where it says regular meetings, I think it would be worthy to take it back to the Board of Supervisors and ask them to change that phrase to in the board where it says the zoning commission is on call for its regular meeting scheduled on the 4th Monday of every month beginning at 5 p.m. I think if we axe that current statement and put in the Board of Supervisors meeting room in the basement, right there, quote, at the Woodbury County's courthouse subject to formal business, I think that would be a reasonable housekeeping item to consider. So I just wanted to put that out there for your consideration. But otherwise, I don't see any major glaring issues in here. I do think that it's appropriate that we follow these as much as possible. I know that there's times like tonight when it's a bit more relaxed, but when we get a more full room, which you have in the past, the 3-minute clock is definitely helpful when you have large rooms full, that everybody gets a fair chance to communicate and talk. So I just throw that out there for some food for thought.
Commissioners, any thoughts, any feedback?
Just one comment, Dan, is it important that we make sure that they come to the podium when they're engaging with us, like the
Yeah.
commissioners, like we had them sitting down out there kind of,
Yeah. And we've been informal in the past when it's
okay.
relaxed like this, but it's probably, if the recorder picks up best there. And that's happened at every board meeting I think I've ever been at where there's somebody in the audience that talks. And it's important to be respectful. So.
What's your pleasure, commissioners?
I'm okay with making the location change permanent.
You need a motion.
Yeah, basically, I would ask if that's a route you want to go. I'd ask for a motion to have a section, and I would like to just hand this out to the commissioners. This is where I put that change in there. If you'd want to look, I highlighted that. And if you make a motion, I'd ask you to make the request to amend section 2 in there and Supervisor Parker, that's what I handed you before.
I'd make a motion to amend section 2 of the rules of procedures for the Woodbury County Zoning Commission regarding the regular meeting locations to state in the Board of Supervisors meeting room in the basement.
Okay, we have a motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye. All opposed, same sign.
Okay, it looks like it passed 5-0. I would like to comment on the process. Basically, what'll happen is the Board of Adjustment's gonna look at theirs next week too. And what we'll do is, once the Board of Adjustment makes a decision one way or the other, they're gonna look at their timing on that, on the time they meet. For stability with the sheriff's department and the security that's here in the evenings, I know that the sheriff's department would prefer them to pull it back to 5 o'clock and to mirror what the zoning commission has done. So they're going to consider that. And under the zoning commission and the Board of Adjustment, both any requested changes to the rules of procedure have to be brought up before the Board of Supervisors. So I'll request that it go on the Board of Supervisors agenda together so that the Board of Supervisors can see context on how both boards want to make the changes respectively. And then once, if they agree to it and take an action on it, then it gets sent back here and technically you'll vote on it again. In other words, you'll receive word in your packets, and for the proceedings, it'll be an agenda item telling you the result of what action the Board of Supervisors took. And when you vote on that the next time after that, then that will empower your chair, Chris, to sign off on that if it's okay with everybody involved.
Okay, so we're ready for the next item on the agenda, which is number 8, public comment on matters not on the agenda, which is informational, having no one on the phone and our one participant here.
I'm not talking.
Okay, does not want to talk anymore. We will move on to item number 9, which is staff update, which is also informational.
Yeah, I think we're in quite a new era with lots going on. There's a lot of excitement going on around the world, different land uses. I get different requests all the time. We got a kind of a busy set of information to look at with the minimum dimension, with nuclear, and various other issues. And every year we have an opportunity with this Iowa State training. Iowa State has a what they call Introduction to Planning and Zoning workshops. And I just got word that they're going to have one on April 22nd at the Sioux City's Woodbury County Extension Office of Iowa State. That's out there in Morningside. They haven't really announced the times yet, but you will likely in the next few weeks be getting an email from staff asking if you would like to attend that. And we'll take care of the registration on that, but it's always kind of a fascinating training opportunity to go back through zoning 101. It's a good refresher for our veterans and definitely helpful for our newest members to kind of go through what much of these zoning processes. And what's kind of nice about it is you'll get to meet some of the area zoning people who decide to attend. Sometimes there'll be Plymouth County or Monona County people there, and sometimes some supervisors will come from other jurisdictions. But we'll ask you to kind of tell us ahead of time if you're going, and we'll see which supervisors come. We always got to be careful on the number who come because of quorums and things like that, the legality there. So we'll manage that, but I always find these to be kind of helpful, much more so being able to ask other people questions that have experienced this stuff, because the presentations can be canned a little bit, but they're definitely helpful as far as the criteria and everything that we look at. But we learn a lot talking to each other, and I think that's a huge opportunity there. So there'll be more to come from staff.
Okay. Are you done,
Oh,
staff?
yeah.
Okay. Number 10, commissioner comment or inquiry. Also informational. Anything, anyone? All right. I ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned officially.
Okay, at 6:56 PM.